Tonight, the stunning whirlwind advance of Syrian rebels continues. Today, they seized the key city of Hama, a huge blow to President Assad and his Russian and Iranian backers. The rebel forces are now heading for Syria's third biggest city, Homs. Damascus, the capital, could then be in their sights. So how did this ragtag rebel army become a formidable fighting force capable of building its own weapons arsenal? As Assad's forces continue to be routed, is this a turning point in the conflict, and what does it mean for the Middle East? Also coming up, the far-right pro-Russian politician who has risen from obscurity and could soon become Romania's next president. The smiling suspect, new images of the man alleged to have assassinated a health insurance boss in New York. And from sleeping in Parliament to facing off with the army, these sacrifices being made by some South Koreans to protect their democracy. That's all coming up on The World with me, Dominic Waghorn. We begin tonight in the Syrian city of Hama. It's where the country's uprising truly caught fire in 2011. You may remember these images, tens of thousands of people holding protests during the Arab Spring. But Bashar al-Assad used brutal force to crush this rebellion, just as his father had in the same city in the 80s. Thousands of people were killed by both men. Bashar al-Assad's crackdown turned a peaceful uprising into a violent struggle and ultimately civil war. Today, in a stunning change in fortune, Syrian rebels say they have liberated the city, and their lightning advance doesn't stop there. Have a look at this map. First, Aleppo fell a few days ago. Now, Assad's forces have been routed in the city of Hama. They're already moving on towards Homs, Syria's third largest city. President Assad has relied on both Iran and Russia for military support. But both countries are distracted, obviously, now by other priorities. So what could happen next? Earlier today, the leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the rebel group, had this to say.
I give you good news, my brothers, that your brothers, the revolutionaries, began entering the city of Hama to sanitize up the wound that has been left in Syria for 40 years. I ask God Almighty that it be a conquest in which there is no revolt.
Well, joining us now with more on that, we'll speak to our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle. Ali, this is a very surprising development in the Middle East, sort of shifting conflict. We get a sense of the tectonic plates of Middle Eastern geopolitics grinding and shifting rather dramatically at the moment. What is your best guess at where these rebels might end up? And do they have some kind of unstoppable momentum, would you say, at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, you talk about tectonic plates. I mean, very little happens in the Middle East in isolation, and you can sort of date back some of what is happening right now to what has been happening here, where I am, and Gaza and Lebanon over the last year or so. And clearly, I think the rebels have sought to take advantage of a weakened Iran, a weakened Hezbollah, and a weakened Russia as well. They're all President Assad's big backers. Russia, of course, now engaged and bogged down in a conflict in Ukraine. I mean, there's plenty of other reasons as well behind it. They have spent their time, the rebels, professionalizing themselves, really making sure that they are no longer sort of a disparate group of militia, but they have genuine units within their military force. They've spent time engaging with local leaders as well, and that has all helped them as they have progressed so rapidly across a part of north and northwestern Syria. So yeah, you know, where now? Well, I mean, 2 weeks ago, if you'd predicted they were going to take Aleppo, people probably would have laughed, but they did. And now, a few days later, they have progressed rapidly to Hama. They're pretty close to Homs. If they get to Homs, that will be a massive strategic victory for them. If they take it, it lies at a crossroads in Syria. And I think if they manage to take Homs, then maybe Assad's days are numbered.
Yeah, some of the pictures that are astonishing. We've seen some pictures. I don't think they're fully verified yet, but it seems of the Assad forces having sort of fled. They've left behind them extraordinary sort of military hardware, including, it seems, some fighter jets. So sort of it echoes of the Taliban taking over Afghanistan. Do you think we could be looking at that kind of outcome? Have they got the kind of the staying power, do you think, to go all the way to the capital?
Well, officially, and I think the Syrian defence minister was on state television tonight saying that they withdrew their forces from Homs in order to preserve their fighting capability, but also to save civilian lives. They didn't, well, the excuse is they didn't want to have what would have probably been a fierce and bloody battle in the urban areas of Homs. So, you know, believe that or not. Whilst I was saying that the rebel forces, HTS in particular, have spent the last few years professionalising, in many respects, the Syrian army has had the opposite happen to them. The economy has been in collapse. The Syrian government, particularly through the military, has started to engage in the narcotics trade, particularly the smuggling of Captagon. It's made them quite a lot of money, but it's meant that they have been ravaged with a lot of corruption as well. And so they have deteriorated as a military force at the same time that Russia has focused elsewhere. Iran has been pushed back by Israel. Hezbollah has been pushed back. They can't count on their backers like they were able to do a number of years ago. So they are in trouble.
Ali, thank you very much there in Jerusalem. Well, as Ali was saying, that the region and the observers were taken by surprise 5 days ago when this rebel force took the city of Aleppo. Now, Syrian filmmaker Waad al-Kateab lived in Aleppo during the uprising and the terrible years that followed and documented them in her film For Sama, which was nominated for an Oscar. In a moment, she'll join me live. But first, here is a reminder of her work.
بحلب مدينتي. لسه عم صور. هذا الشيء اللي عم بيخلي معنى لوجودي. ما حدا منا كان عنده أي فكرة كيف رح تتغير حياتنا للأبد.
Well, it is a very powerful documentary that takes you right to the heart of those terrible years. And as I say, Waad al-Kateab, I'm pleased to say, is joining us in the studio. Very timely having you here, Waad.
Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you here. When you watch what's happening in Syria now, and when you heard the news about your city being taken by this rebel force, what went through your mind?
It was something, I think, for years, and it's been 8 years since we were displaced out of Aleppo, exactly like this month in December. To be honest, when I said goodbye to everything, I would never even imagine in my lifetime that something I will be back. Watching these images coming out from there, watching people like me, activists, and coming back to their homes, to their families after years of being just apart. It was just something so emotional. There's hope. There was no hope for years now. Assad was recontrolling Syria. So many governments, including the EU and specifically Italy, who opened a new embassy for Damascus in Italy. Everyone is just pushing us to deal with Assad as a fact. The one and the regime who killed us for years, who displaced us for years, who used chemical weapon on us. And now, no, it's been retaken by the rebels, where it should be.
One of those sort of very moving scenes in your film is you saying goodbye to your house very tearfully. Do you look forward to, you have been back since, obviously, but going back to it as a free city? And Syria has had so many false dawns, hasn't it? We don't know much about this group and how much it has changed. Is it naive to expect this group can usher in freedom, or is it going to just lead to more civil war?
I think whatever this group was, it won't be as bad as Assad was. For years, 13 years, we've been trying to call for the international community, for our own people, for everyone, just to, there's no way, people can take this as, it's fine and we are okay in our life, where there's over, 6 million Syrian refugees out of Syria. There's another 6 who are living in camps today. People are living in a very in northwest of Syria, very intensive area with civilians who've been displaced for many years, who until today still under Russia and Iranian attacks. How this could be, okay. So whatever this group is today is we know about them, because also what we can see today on the ground is something very surprising for all of us. As activists, who believe in democracy and freedom, Yes, we don't agree with their kind of agenda and what they think about, but what we are seeing today on the ground is something very different. And, if we would just have this opportunity, we have to take this opportunity. We have to take our role as Syrian civil society, which it is happening today in Aleppo. Today in Hama, one of the biggest prisons in the area, where there was over 3,000 prisoners who were released. One of them is one Lebanese guy. He was detained for 40 years. He was detained when he was 16 because of the,
By Assad's fault?
Yes.
By Hafiz al-Assad?
By Hafiz al-Assad. And today we're looking at these people who are just cut off the whole world, and everyone was just okay, moving forward in their life as if it's okay. And it's not, no.
And, this group has stunned everybody by coming out of the sort of the shadows and having this whirlwind advance.
Yeah.
And you wonder how the rest of the region is going to respond to it. What do you think the West should do? It's an al-Qaeda sort of inspired group, originally at least. As you say, it's kind of transformed itself. What should the UK do now, do you think?
I mean, definitely, we need first no-fly zone to protect all the civilians who lived in north now of Syria. Now we're almost talking about Hama, which is middle of Syria. All these people, I think, whatever you're thinking about this group or different group or whatever, everyone agrees that the most dangerous things now is the attacks that Assad, supported by Russia and Iran, could still have on civilians. In these couple of days, like Assad were attacking the university hospital, another hospital in Aleppo, 3 hospitals in Idlib, and we are watching these, like massive massacres happening there. Civilians should be protected, whether it was controlled by al-Qaeda or by whoever they think they are. On the other hand, we need all the support for Syrian civil society to be able to lead this area. All the statements that we're seeing from these groups are, again, very surprising. We have a history with trust issue between us as activists and them, and yet they are acting in an amazing way, comparing to what we've learned about them before.
We should remember that Hama was the moment of great hope, wasn't it, in 2011? The uprising that began in the south, it caught fire, tens of thousands of people protesting there and demonstrating, and then Assad just crushed it brutally. Is this the first time that you're allowing yourself to kind of hope that the Assad era could be coming to an end? I
mean, definitely, yes. The first 2 days, even when my own city, Aleppo, was retaken, and I've got footage from people I know there, from my own house there, and I wasn't able to feel any hope because I was so scared. I was so scared with what's coming next. Today, it's been 6 days tomorrow, and with everything is going on, you can't not be hopeful, it is the only hope we can get, because the international community let us down, because they've been abandoning us for years. Even when the earthquake hit northwest of Syria, everything was just going to kind of normalize with Assad, as if he's the fact that we should accept all. Today, there's a new path, and we have to take every opportunity and just try to focus on how can we make things better. Last one thing I wanted just to say, this rebel group which you are talking about, there's part of them which is THS, but there's so many other people who are like me, activists who are there, people who lives in this area. There's families, there are people they've been displaced out of their homes and they live in camps for years. They have the right to return, and that's the only way for them to go back.
Waad al-Kateab, thank you so much. So good to have you on the show, particularly on a day like this. And of course, you've gone from activist to exile from your country and now filmmaker, and you're making one documentary after another. So good luck with those.
Thank you so much.
So good to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, we were talking about Russia backing President Assad there. In Romania, the front-runner in presidential elections this weekend is a pro-Putin, ultra-nationalist TikTok star, causing shudders among the country's European allies. Callamard Georgescu wants to stop Ukrainian grain being transported through Romania and to prevent military aid to Ukraine passing through its borders. But he's told Sky News that suggestions Russia has helped his campaign are not true. Callamard Georgescu has taken a lead that has shocked many. He won the first round of the election, receiving over 2 million votes. He's praised Russian President Vladimir Putin as a man who loves his country and called Ukraine an invented state. Still, he claims not to be pro-Russian. Romania is strategically important a vital conduit for Ukrainian grain and Western military support, and is on the shores of the Black Sea facing Russian-occupied Crimea. NATO has one of its largest air bases there. Georgescu wants a Romania-first policy to become self-reliant in areas such as energy, food and water. He's been speaking to Adam Parsons in Bucharest.
Here's the man who's rushed from obscurity to the brink of political power. Calin Georgescu, favourite to be Romania's next president. An unabashed populist, his popularity skyrocketed thanks to a TikTok campaign. Romanian security services think it was pushed by Russia. Georgescu's critics have said he's broken campaign rules and that he's dangerously fond of Vladimir Putin. Georgescu told me he denies it all.
Vladimir Putin is, in his country, is a leader, is a patriot, but I'm not a fan of Mr. Vladimir Putin. I take care about my people and Romania, and of course I shall take care about my country.
Also clarify, you said you didn't spend anything on your campaign.
Yes.
The Secret Service says you spent €1 million.
Yeah, it's their problem. It's not mine.
Over the border in Ukraine, the fighting continues. Georgescu's politics are all about putting his country first, of scepticism about the global elite. So does he have a plan to take his country out of NATO or the EU?
I don't against NATO or European Union. It's fine. It's absolutely, how I can say, very good. The only point which I said many times, I have nothing to do with these two clubs. It's fine to be like this, absolutely no problem. But the only point is we have to negotiate our interest.
He's also a self-professed Donald Trump supporter and insists scientists have got it wrong on COVID and global warming.
Yes, climate change exists, but is not the human being who can do that. But climate change is a natural matter.
And do you believe in COVID?
I don't believe on that. Nobody have seen. Did you see the COVID?
Well, I've had COVID.
Look, no, did you see the
did I see the virus?
virus, yeah.
Well, it's microscopic, so no, I can't.
I don't know, nobody have seen. But, you know, I'm confident in the immunity of what God made for us.
The first round of the election propelled Georgescu into the limelight. The second round is on Sunday, and it may well carry him to the presidency. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Bucharest.
You're watching The World with me, Dominic Waghorn, still to come. Human rights group Amnesty International has accused Israel of committing genocide in Gaza. I'll speak to their Secretary General.
Paris reverberated to the sights, sounds and smells of conflict. There's a focal point to all this anger, and that is Emmanuel Macron. I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. There are dozens of people desperately clambering to get onto that boat. It is a chaotic scene, but it's being watched by dozens of French police officers on the beach. I've reported on migration across Europe, close up on the ground, understanding that sense of desperation and meeting the criminal gangs behind it. This old fishing boat set off from the Libyan port of Tobruk. There were 606 people who were on board. So we've been distributing life jackets to all the people on board this boat, and now the first person is coming on board. This is the ugly side of Italian football.
In Italy, everything is really organized.
Football's problems with hooliganism, racism were just dormant, and now they're back and they're getting worse. We cover so many countries, languages and cultures and work hard to gain trust to bring you the full story first. Help is slowly reaching these places. It's not just homes, but whole streets like this one that have been reduced to rubble and dust. This is a picture of destruction. Everywhere you look in this mountaintop community, there is absolute devastation. These are the settlers in waiting, keen to start a new life, to annex Gaza for Israel.
The least we can do is just kick them out of our land.
Gaza, which is just 2 miles in that direction, is under attack again.
Getting the chance to tell people's stories, it's a privilege.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
This conflict. They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Welcome back to Gaza now, because today the human rights group Amnesty International directly accused Israel of committing genocide there. Amnesty says Israel has deliberately destroyed Palestinians and denied them food and other supplies with genocidal intent. Accusations vehemently denied by Israel. So what exactly are Amnesty saying in their report? The human rights group cites the Genocide Convention, which describes it as acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethical, racial or religious group. Amnesty says Israel's actions in Gaza meet that threshold on at least 3 out of 5 conditions listed in the convention. The first 2 of them being the killing and causing serious bodily or mental harm. Amnesty investigated 15 Israeli airstrikes that killed at least 330 people. Including this one in Rafah on the 20th of April. Airstrikes destroyed a family home, killing 16 children. Amnesty say they found no evidence that any of these strikes were directed at military targets. Another condition highlighted in the report is inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction. Using satellite imagery, they have mapped out huge swathes of agricultural land damaged by Israeli operations, as well as homes and critical infrastructure. Amnesty estimates that 1.9 million Gazans have been displaced as a result of Israeli action. That is 90% of Gaza's population. And finally, the human rights group have investigated the scale of Israel's intent to destroy. They've reviewed hundreds of videos from officials and military on the ground, including soldiers apparently making light of the destruction. Amnesty says the lack of action by the international community amounts to what they describe as a seismic and shameful failure. Well, joining me now is the Secretary-General of Amnesty International, Agnès Callamard. Mrs. Callamard, thank you so much for joining us tonight. What seems to be central to the very grave allegation of genocide, particularly against a nation who's set up because of a genocide against them, a very real genocide, the Holocaust in World War II. Central to that allegation has to be proving intent. Acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethical, racial or religious group. So I think it's important to start there. How can you prove that the intent amongst Israeli soldiers, commanders and officials was to commit genocide?
We prove it on the basis of what the jurisprudence has said, which is you need to take into account all the conduct of a state, in this case Israel. You need to look at it holistically. You need to take into account the repetition, the occurrence, the reoccurrence of those acts. You need to identify the patterns. You need to determine whether there are plausible explanations. You need to look at direct information such as statements being made by the authorities, statements being made by soldiers on the ground. And we followed those instructions. I should also highlight that the jurisprudence clearly states that in an armed conflict situation, there can be other objectives beside genocidal intent. And we are in the context of an armed conflict. So, of course, Israel has military objectives, including those to eliminate Hamas. But that military objective can coexist alongside genocidal intent. And this is what we have demonstrated in that report on the basis of the jurisprudence and international law.
OK, but if you talk to Israeli officials and what they've said, and they said it to the ICJ, was some of these comments were exaggeration, they were hyperbole, in a region where everyone indulges in hyperbole, and they were made at a time, an extremely distressing, traumatising time, the moments in the aftermath after October the 7th. And therefore, they should be cut some slack here. When they talked about completely cutting off Gaza, that was an exaggeration. Are you misreading, possibly, what the Israeli officials said, and thereby unfairly accusing them of this very grave crime against humanity?
No, we haven't. First of all, the statements are only one small part of the evidence. What I want to insist again on the conduct of Israel in Gaza over the last 14 months. And that conduct demonstrates that many of the actions repeated over time had no military necessity and no military objective. The starvation of the Gazaean, of the population, the fact that they have no access to drinkable water, the destruction of the farming lands, the destruction of homes and infrastructures, even after the militaries had gained military control over them. The repeated evacuation order to move people to places even smaller and smaller without any conditions there to allow them to live. The fact that now people live without any dignity, that they have to fight to get a piece of bread, the absence of medicine, the fact that surgeons cannot operate, the doctors cannot practice, kids are born under incredible...
Are you saying that all of that...
have no military necessity? That is the point. They have no military necessity. The only objective behind those acts is to destroy the Palestinian people, civilians. That is part of genocidal intent. The statements made are only an additional evidence being provided, and we
look at
those statements.
Sorry, Ms. Callamard, I had to interrupt because we have limited time. If I could just
October 7th, we've looked at them over 6 months period. We've looked at statements by soldiers throughout the period under investigation. So we are not just looking at the first days after the heinous crimes of Hamas of October 7th.
Let me ask you this. Are you convinced in your mind that the Israeli government and Israeli leaders genuinely want to wipe out the Palestinians of Gaza? That is their clear intent, and that's what they're doing. Because if that's the case, why are they calling ahead buildings that they're going to strike by the air to warn people to get out? Why are they letting in aid, albeit imperfectly, but they are letting aid in, and they have been in hundreds of trucks, they would say? That's not really compatible, surely, with a government trying to wipe out an entire race, is it?
Absolutely not true. It's absolutely not true. First of all, our investigation has shown that in the 15 cases that we have thoroughly investigated, it's only the tip of the iceberg. We have many more evidence to it. But in those 15 cases, only in one case were people told that there was gonna be an attack. So it is not at all the norm for Israeli to warn people, and warnings are not amounting to taking necessary precaution. In fact, most of those warnings have been known to create chaos, to create panic. They happen in the middle of the night, which is the other thing that is characteristic of this military operation. The use of large, huge bombs when it is not necessary in immensely populated area. The use of such weapon is meant to inflict the greatest number of casualties. They are used at night when people are asleep. There is no military necessity there when there are no Hamas fighters located, and they are not everywhere, sorry. So, you know, you're talking about humanitarian aid. The little piecemeal approach to the provision of humanitarian assistance is shameful. You just need to look at the result on the ground. People have no food. The rate of malnutrition, the rate of diseases, the absence of, you know,
Sorry
so
to
there is
interrupt,
absolutely, yeah. Go ahead.
If I take your point about the aid, if I could just finally put to you that in response to this, Israeli officials said to Sky earlier that Amnesty doesn't accept, he says, that Israel should exist. And Israel was born guilty, he said, back in the 40s. Is that true? Does Amnesty accept that Israel has a right to exist?
Absolutely not. Actually, we've said it repeatedly since, you know, for as long as we have existed ourselves, that, of course, Israel has the right to exist, that Israeli people, Jewish people, have a right to self-determination. We have recognized that, in fact, the state of Israel has a right even to be a Jewish state, provided it is not discriminating against non-Jewish people. So it could not be further away from the truth. We are insisting that both Jewish and Palestinian people, Israeli Jewish and Palestinian people, have a right to self-determination and to determine how their state should be organized.
Agnès Callamard from Amnesty International, thank you very much for joining us on The World this evening. Thank you. Well, earlier, Israeli government spokesperson David Mentzer gave his reaction to the report on Sky News. Have a listen.
This is a classic example of anti-Semitism. It is Holocaust inversion. The crimes committed against my people, Israel, are now, in turn, being accused of this same crime. The reality is that this genocide claim just completely fails to address Hamas's genocidal rhetoric. You know, their leaders call for the eradication of Jews, the wiping of my country off the face of the earth. This report's supposed to be impartial. It's ridiculous.
Well, dozens of hostages, of course, are still being held in Gaza. 28-year-old Emily Damari is the last remaining British national still being held there. Today, her mother, Mandy, spoke to the media in London amid new hopes of a ceasefire and after the publication of that Amnesty report. She stressed that the treatment of hostages still being held in Gaza also amounted to a war crime.
I went to Geneva last week and I spoke to the Human Rights Commission, and I've spoken several times to the president of the Red Cross, the ICRC, and they all agree that what's happening in Gaza to the hostages is a war crime. They're not getting any treatment there. They're not getting any humanitarian aid. And that's what interests me. Again, you're talking about decisions that are above my head.
So that's Mandy, the mother of 28-year-old Emily Damari, still being held as a hostage in Gaza. This is The World with me, Dominic Waghorn. Next up, we'll cross to New York after the murder of a health insurance chief executive.
jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Welcome back. Well, police in New York have released new images of the suspect thought to have murdered the healthcare insurance boss Brian Thompson. They're also investigating the meaning behind 3 words written on shell casings recovered from the scene. These were deny, defend and depose. Our international correspondent Diana Magnay sent this report from New York.
2 new images released by New York police of the gunman wanted for the murder of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, unmasked and smiling. A homicide in the heart of Manhattan, premeditated, targeted. A $10,000 reward for anyone who can give information on this man. Business as usual outside the Hilton Hotel where it happened. But according to a source in law enforcement, bullet casings left at the scene were inscribed with the words deny, defend, depose. Possibly a play on the title of this book about the health insurance business and how the man on the street can fight back. And if so, a potential motive of sorts for targeting a man in charge of millions of Americans' health insurance. The killer made his getaway down this wide alleyway before cycling towards Central Park, with a pit stop at a nearby Starbucks before the killing. From those photos, you can see that the gunman came to this Starbucks shortly before he moved on to the Hilton Hotel. He was recorded on the CCTV up there, and these are the same tables and chairs that were in the background of those photos. And we understand that he bought a bottle of water and a couple of energy bars or protein bars and then threw away the wrappers, which are now key pieces of evidence in the case. And just across the road, a rack of city bikes, which we know the killer used to flee the scene. New Yorkers shocked at what's happened, hazarding a guess at motive if this was about the nation's health insurance.
It's unfortunate for citizens here to have to afford some of these insurances. You know, there's ways to afford it, but there's a lot of people that don't have access to those ways.
We're the richest country in the world, and we don't have free health care for our people. Yeah, it's very unfortunate. People go into debt with medical bills, and it's not how it should be. But this probably wasn't the right answer to go about it either.
With visuals of the gunman's face, it is surely only a matter of time before he's ID'd. Police honing in on this hostel in the Upper West Side, where he's believed to have stayed. But for now, the manhunt to bring him in continues.
Well, Diana joins us now from New York. Diana, this is a sort of tragic whodunit that is intriguing people around the world, trying to work out who did this and why. Do we assume that these shell casings with these words deny, defend and depose are a trail of clues being left behind deliberately by the killer?
Well, you would have thought so, that he was trying to leave a message with that, and especially because it's so close to the name of that book and the whole sort of concept of how health insurers do deny or may deny, paying out on claims and defend why they're doing it. These bullet casings clearly seem to be a play on words on that. He does appear to have been a professional with a gun, or extremely proficient with a gun, was the way the police said it. But he also did leave a trail of clues which seemed to build up. You know, the fact that he allowed himself to appear unmasked in those photos we started the report with, in this hostel, which we ended it with. The fact that he bought this water and wrappers and was at a Starbucks shortly before he murdered Brian Thompson here at the hotel behind me. Police are also looking at this telephone, presumably a burner phone, which he's videoed using, talking on before he makes the assassination attempt, and which he then threw away. And when you look at the video of him holding up the gun, he is not wearing gloves. You know, you wonder, did he put the bullets in without gloves? I mean, there are a whole host of pieces of evidence that the New York police are presumably poring over now, that detectives are looking at. We also don't know, of course, Dominic, if he was a paid assassin or if he had a personal grievance. So a lot of details still to piece together, but you get the sense that police are closing in and that we might have more answers soon.
Agnès, thank you there in New York on that intriguing story. Well, to Sudan now, and after almost 2 years of civil war, the country has been declared the world's biggest humanitarian crisis, with more than 30 million people in need of aid. Sky News has heard harrowing testimony about how sexual violence is being used as a weapon of war, with victims as young as 11 years old.
The rapid support forces took my 2 female cousins to another room. They locked us in the room and raped our cousins. After some time, their cries quietened, and after the shock we had a bigger shock to come. We found our 2 cousins had committed suicide.
Well, that was a voice note sent to an organisation run by the activist Hala Al-Karib, and she is head of the Strategic Initiative for Women in the Horn of Africa. And I'm happy to say joins me now. Hala, thank you so much for joining us on this horrendous story. Give us an idea, first of all. It is very harrowing, the testimony that you've accumulated, but how widespread is it across this conflict?
It's extremely widespread across Sudan. This is basically the tip of the iceberg. This is what we have been living through over the past more than 20 or 22 months of war. Since the war started in April 15. Sexual violence has been the main features and the center of this war, where women's bodies have been used as a tool of war, as a strategy of war. And, Sudan basically at this point in time becoming the capital of sexual violence, I believe, across the world. So it's, we have been living in this nightmare, and, women and girls have been living in this nightmare, throughout the past more than 20 months in different parts of the country. And it's like a nightmare that we are living through over and again. What's happening right now in Al Jazeera is exactly what has happened in Al Junaina. It is what's happening in South Kordofan. It's what's happening in North Kordofan, particularly in territories and areas that's under the control of the Rapid Support Forces, which is controlling, most of the country, regions at this point in time.
Give us an idea of specifically how. I mean, it's doubly disturbing because these are girls, and some of them young girls, who are being, first of all, raped, and then they feel so dishonoured by the traumatic experience, they are then taking their own lives. Is that happening on a widespread level? Or is that reaction by the girls who are violated and raped like this, is it sort of fairly normal that they then feel they have to take their lives because they feel so dishonoured?
It's the burden of shame is really what has obstructed, the conversation about sexual violence in Sudan. This is something that has been happening in Sudan for more than 20 years, since the war started in Darfur in 2003. And unfortunately, our political elites and our, policy and legal framework and has banned the conversations and the for Sudanese people to confront these horrific crimes. So they have been a strong sense of denial. And with this denial, the victims had to live with the burden of shame. And as a result, many women, they struggle with serious mental health issues, or ultimately they commit suicide. The situation, what happened in Al Jazeera state particularly, this is a region that, it's quite new to the concept of war and militarization. Those are communities of farmers who lived in peace for more than 100 years. And the fact that they were exposed to this level of atrocities, the RSF going door to door, separating men from women, systematically raping women and abducting young women and taking them to unknown locations. It has been extremely traumatized. And with this come the whole issue of young women taking their own lives. But there is also another element to this, disaster and catastrophic situation. alongside the sexual violence, there is torture, there is sexual slavery. 90% of the sexual violence cases that we have documented, they were gang rape cases, which is, and women and girls, they were ashamed. They were raped in front of their families. They were raped in front of their fathers and in front of their siblings. And that's something that for young girls, teenage girls to live with, and the torture they experience, it's really something unbearable.
Hala Al-Karib, thank you so much for talking to us and also for your work bringing this to the world's attention. Thank you for talking to us on The World. Well, another person bringing it to the world's attention is our Africa correspondent, Yusra El-Baghir, who is reportedly extensively on the conflict in Sudan and joins us live. Yusra, the RSF is accused of this. Have they responded to these gross allegations of this kind of misconduct? Have they said anything about why their soldiers are doing this?
They have responded to us, Dominic. We put these allegations to them and they vehemently denied them. They say we categorically denied these allegations. And they said they'd be happy to put forward a senior representative to speak to us, but then completely ignored us when we asked for a senior representative to come on tonight's show to speak to you. And I think the reason that they're avoiding that kind of confrontation is because it's very difficult to defend their attachment or association with sexual violence in Sudan. We saw videos of them entering eastern Al Jazeera in late October on a rampage after one of their senior commanders in the region defected to the army. And then shortly after, we started hearing online reports circulating of sexual violence, extreme cases of sexual violence and suicides related to that sexual violence. But they also have a horrific history of sexual violence in Darfur, where they're from. The RSF grew out of the Janjaweed militias that terrorized Darfur in the early 2000s in a conflict categorized later on by the US and by the ICC as a genocide. So I think it'll be very difficult for them to kind of create distance from crimes where survivors are telling us, they've told non-profit organizations like the Strategic Initiative for Women in the Horn of Africa that they were targeted by the Rapid Support Forces. But again, we are seeing very little intervention. We've yet to see the head of the RSF Hemeti be sanctioned by any country, and we're yet to see the gears of international justice move quickly enough for them to be held accountable for what they're carrying out as we speak now in Sudan.
Yusra, thank you so much for that, and a disturbing but very important story for us to have on The World. And if you've been affected by anything you heard in that report, you can contact the Samaritans on 116 123 or email joe@samaritans.org. Well, South Korea's president is facing a looming impeachment vote on Saturday following the turmoil he brought to the country by declaring martial law. 6 hours of chaos ensued before the ruling was eventually lifted. And yet many lawmakers remain anxious about the possibility of the move being repeated. So much so that politicians are sleeping inside Parliament. Our Asia correspondent, Cordelia Lynch, has been hearing from those worried about what happens next. She sent this report from Seoul.
So I came straight away. I scaled the fence over there and I came to this entrance.
As the army charged into the National Assembly in Seoul, Lee Yong-jin rushed to film it.
Yeah, they were trying to storm inside. I was here to stop the army from entering the Parliament building so that MPs could vote to lift the martial law.
You took a risk.
I did.
Your aim?
My aim, to put it grandly, it sounds like I'm trying to protect democracy, and that's what I was doing. I knew that. I knew the risks involved. I knew I could be arrested or shot because martial law was declared. But I thought as soon as MPs vote to lift the martial law, that would be the aim. I needed to do that right away.
These images show the chaos and confusion that played out. Troops surrounding those trying to vote. Democratic lawmaker Kang Sun-woo was one of many inside. The shock still hasn't left her.
I feel like I'm just kind of lost in time because the declaration of martial law in 2024 is so unrealistic. I thought it was a nightmare. and then boom, it's just really happening.
You and other lawmakers have been sleeping in the National Assembly. Why?
We are concerned and we are afraid that President Yoon declares another martial law. I haven't been able to go home for 2 days, 3 days. And all of my colleagues are doing that, approximately 170 members are literally, physically staying here in National Assembly, sleeping, eating, washing here right now.
The South Korean police are investigating him for alleged insurrection. That carries potentially the death penalty. Do you think he's guilty of an insurrection?
Personally, I do think he is guilty, personally. But we will see how it goes.
But first comes an impeachment vote on Saturday. The ruling party has already vowed to block it. If it does, expect large protests in a nation already very anxious and angry. Cordelia Lynch, Sky News, Seoul, South Korea.
Well, in Washington, Elon Musk, the world's richest man, is on Capitol Hill today, holding meetings about his plans to cut down the size of the US government once Donald Trump takes power. Let's cross to our US correspondent, Mark Stone. Mark, any clues as to what he's going to do, how big a hatchet he's going to take to the US federal government?
Well, a fleet of bulldozers, I think, is how many people are seeing it. He is, some say, going to rip the heart out of federal government. He wants to cut waste. He wants to remove inefficiency in government. And that is precisely why Donald Trump has placed him at the heart of his incoming White House. This trip to Capitol Hill was the first trip that Elon Musk, the world's richest man, has made here to the swamp, as he and others see it, since he was put at the heart of this incoming White House. And it was, I guess, the beginning of the process to see what DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, will do. And he met Republican lawmakers, a very friendly meeting because they all think he's wonderful. He also took his son with him, which is in keeping with his unorthodox methods. We tried to catch up with him as he left. He didn't say much, but it's worth having a look.
Mr. Musk, how's power feeling, sir? How's power feeling, Mr. Musk? Mr. Musk, will you talk to us? Will you answer any questions?
Can you answer a question real quick?
Come on, tell us how you're going to deal with the conflicts of interest.
Look, I think that's one key question that he wouldn't answer, nor indeed would his 4-year-old son, who did give a wave to us. It's the conflicts of interest, because he has such huge companies. His companies, some of them have government contracts, and now he is in the heart of government running this efficiency organisation. And one issue has come up just today. Of course, he owns Tesla, and yet another electric car company, Rivian, has been given money by the Biden administration, given tax breaks and all the rest of it, in order to help it. Well, that money, the new administration says, would go away, which would, of course, benefit his company, Tesla. So plenty of unanswered questions for Elon Musk. This, the beginning of many, many times, I think, where we will see that man and maybe his son on Capitol Hill, ripping the heart, some say, out of federal government.
Mark Stone in Washington, thank you for that. Extraordinary, really. A man who's probably got the most secure job in the world as the world's richest man, taking away job security potentially for thousands of American federal government workers. But that's how things are panning out ahead of Donald Trump returning to the White House. On a day where, in other news, Syria's rebel forces have pushed their lightning advance down to the city of Hama and are tonight, it seems, heading towards the third biggest city in Syria of Homs. That is all for tonight's programme. Anna Botting is up next with News at 10, covering Labour's big reset.